Pull up a chair, get comfortable.
I came here to have a good time today. I came here to have fun with friends.
You like that nerd speak.
3, 2, 1, 0. Nice to be in orbit.
And now here is part 2 of episode 1 of season 1 of the Manufictioners Club. We continue the journey discussing the trope of Tony Stark's loss of his parents and the technology developer as a user of the technology. Here we go. And we're back. Well, it was a good break. Hope everyone's rested. Hope you had a chance to rehydrate. If you felt that you perspired too much, maybe you had a change of clothes. But now let's get into it. Tony Stark. There's a lot you can say about Tony Stark. You can call him genius, billionaire, philanthropist, playboy, which is what he called himself in the first Avengers movie in 2012.
Yep.
But that feels, in addition to being, hashtag humble brag at that moment and throwing some shade on Steve.
Yes, he did.
In the Avengers.
Steve deserved it.
It's also a little bit reductive, isn't it? I mean, Tony Stark, while he is those things both in the comic book version as well as in the movie version, there's a core to Tony Stark, which is a very common core in a lot of what we would think of as our canonical mainstream comic book heroes, such as Batman, such as Spider-Man, such as Superman, even Wonder Woman to an extent, which this will make sense in a moment. Is that there's a loss of parental figure in early in Tony's life. Now in the comics, it's not really clear, at least in the early comics, when Tony's father passes away. But by the time we are introduced to Tony Stark in the comics, he's already in control of Stark Industries. Mm-hmm. He is the CEO. He's the guy, driving everything. But it was founded by his father, Howard. And that Howard's been killed somehow. And that's, brought into much greater relief in the movies, not necessarily just in the first movie, but in later Marvel movies where we actually see Howard and his wife get killed. But again, while Tony is genius, billionaire, playboy, philanthropist, playboy, he's also a guy who lost his dad that he really admired and really looked up to. And that's sort of the driving force behind Tony trying to prove himself, both, again, in the comic book and in the movie version, is how do I live up to that example of my father? Mm-hmm. How do I show the world that I'm the worthy inheritor of his legacy? And I bring that up in the context of our stakeholder conversation because understanding your stakeholders is really important. So just seeing someone as an end user of a technology will get you so far. That's important. You have to understand the context in which they're working. Mm-hmm. But if you're able to also look a little bit further and dig a little bit deeper and try to understand not only the person putting their hands on the keyboard and using your application, but also who are they? Why are they using this? Not just, what are they trying to accomplish, but deeper down, who are those people? Why are they doing the things that they do? That won't necessarily always come out in your development, but I think it's important not only for your purposes as a potential project manager or business analyst, but also if you're going to be doing any kind of training, because you can be a much more effective trainer if you understand how the people are receiving information. Are they visual? Mm-hmm. Those kinds of things. So again, understanding the stakeholder is key. So let's dig a little bit further into Tony.
Yep.
Lost his dad, lost his mom. He is trying to prove himself. So he has a question. I do,
yeah. I do have a question, yeah. How old was he when he lost his parents?
That, again, I did not prompt her for this question. She brought that to the table by herself. It's a really interesting question because it's not clear to me in the comic book version when exactly, although those of you who are deeper in the Iron Man lore and our subscribers can inform us on our Patreon channel. But in the movies, it's what was it? It's some senior year of high school, I think. He was home for for winter break from boarding school, and his parents go off to drive down to D.C. and they get killed by the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, but I forget. Yeah, because that was in Civil War, but I forget if that was either senior year in high school before he went to MIT or at some point during his time at MIT. But
Well,
somewhere around there, that's when in the movie, yes,
Okay.
right? Somewhere in like late adolescence towards adulthood in the cinematic universe, that's when he lost both his parents.
And I will tell you, as someone who lived through the 80s and saw Less Than Zero in the theaters, I would say that de-aged version of Robert Downey Jr. was about 18, 19
Okay.
in Civil War.
So there we go. Then.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have some anecdotal evidence, which is just good. Yeah, no, so those are some really formative years in which he loses his parents.
Yeah. And also not really knowing what happened, because the way it's presented in the movies, it's a car accident, but he just thinks it's a car accident. It's tragic. We find out later because it's comic books, it's drama, it's there's got to be some extra spice there. We find out that it's actually Steve's good buddy from his formative days in Brooklyn, who has become the Winter Soldier and has been given a version of the super soldier serum that Steve took to become Captain America, who is then turned into the bad guy. This Winter Soldier was turned into the bad guy by Hydra, and he's actually the one that kills Tony's parents, which leads us to that gripping denouement in Civil War where Steve says, "Tony, he's my friend," and Tony says, "So was I."
And then it's like the reverse Triforce. there were no winners. In that
No.
Doesn't seem good. Seems bad. Seems real bad.
It was bad. It was bad.
Yeah, so one of the things we're going to do on our Patreon channel is we're going to do movie nights where, for Zaheen's benefit, as someone coming from the outside looking in on the Marvel experience, we're going to introduce her to all of these Shakespearean themes that get explored.
Yeah, I'm excited to spend many, many hours getting very familiar with all of these movies.
It's a deep bench. It's a deep bench. It's a deep bench.
Yes, and so that's gonna be some bonus content that you can follow along with, and if you've ever watched an episode of Mystery Science Theater 3000, very much in that vein, though no robot puppets.
Yep.
Well, let's
That
not make
we-
any
that we know of.
promises, right? Let's not,
Early days here, we can't say it definitively. Anyway, back to Tony for a second, because we do have other stakeholders we're going to talk about. But back to Tony for a second. I think the other really interesting thing about Tony as a stakeholder is he is not only the end user of this technology, the Iron Man armor, he's the developer. And that's very different from your common technology projects where you've got a developer who does all of the building of the technology, the coding of the technology, if it's software, doing all the wiring, if it's hardware, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got a very separate set of stakeholders who are doing that work from the people that are actually going to be using the technology. But Tony is both. He is the person developing the technology, building the Iron Man armor, developing the software that's going to run it, at least in the movie version, because our ideas of software in 1963 were not as robustly developed, believe it or not. So no, there's no laptop featured in the Tales of Suspense number 39, which this surprised me when I looked at it. 12 cents. 12 cents to buy that seminal piece of fiction in 1963.
what a bargain. Well, how much is 12 cents with inflation?
Probably $10,000.
Yeah, so you know what? Maybe let's not say it was a bargain because it might have been just an upper class thing.
Well, yeah,
Sure.
as a middle class kid buying comic books, they were always very aspirational for me on multiple levels. Not only the superhero level, but I have enough money to buy a comic book.
Yeah.
Check me out,
Yeah,
ladies.
hot
Fellas.
stuff right there.
Comic book coming through. Watch out.
And also I can tell you, in terms of the teenage social dynamic in which I was buying those comic books, comic book nerds were highly coveted. When you saw a guy walk out of the comic book store, you said, "There's a guy who's going places." He's got things figured out. He's put together. He's well dressed. His hair is, it's like the Warren Zevon song "Werewolves of London."
Yes.
I saw a werewolf at Trader Vic's.
Yeah.
His hair was perfect. That's comic book nerds are the werewolves.
That's it. It's like, oh, he operates on a schedule. He knows they come out on
By
Wednesdays.
the way,
This
that's
man's good.
that we just created a T-shirt.
Did we?
Comic book nerds are werewolves.
I do have to ask, did they have the great hair too?
Well, that's what I just said. Comic book nerds, impeccable. Every aspect of their
perfect.
presentation. Fitness, hair, clothing.
Social
you know,
cues?
if you've ever seen
Good question. You let it trail off.
if you've seen Saturday Night Fever, Danny was a comic book nerd.
Oh,
very,
really?
very, very little understood, but
Really?
clearly a comic book nerd.
Well,
That's why his social skills were amazing.
the two obviously just correlated.
Of course. It's a
I mean,
one-to-one.
I can't say this definitively, but I'm pretty sure the guys that wrote Saturday Night Fever were actually in the room at my household when my dad touched my hair, and I said, "My hair, you're always touching it." My accent was very different when I was younger. So anyway, Tony, developer, user,
Yep.
but not the only stakeholder.
No.
Stick that in the file on the back of your head for a moment. We're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the other stakeholders of the Iron Man army, because I'm telling you, it's not just Tony. Hold that thought. So having listened to that now, do you agree comic book nerds are werewolves? Maybe they're vampires. Team Edward, Team Jacob. Tell us in the comments.